Have you wondered if you might be missing something when it comes to language learning? Could changing how you learn languages actually be the key to making progress? We all know the internet is full of advice and opinions about different ways to learn languages, and in the interest of trying to be open-minded, I'm going to completely change how I learn languages for the next 30 days. But here's the catch. I suspect I'm going to find this a lot harder than my usual method, and I'm hoping I can stick with it for the whole month and not be a complete failure. Learning a language can seem daunting if you haven't got much experience, and one of the biggest things that you can do is to find out what works for you. So I'm going to try something completely different and see how it affects my Spanish. I also want to find out more about memory, because after all, there's no point learning new words if we can't remember them. Right, I'm British, I need a cup of tea, otherwise I can't do anything. So before we get onto the experiment I'm going to try for the next 30 days, it's probably a good idea to tell you about how I've learned Spanish so far. So I did an online course for beginners, super basic, but it got me started and helped me understand some of the ideas like conjugating words. I tried to speak at the time, but without enough words and grammar, it was incredibly painful. And I also found it really demotivating being corrected all of the time. So instead, I just focused on picking up the language. So I just watched, listened, and read a load of content without studying at all. Literally, that's all I did. And you know what? It worked. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect, not by a long stretch, but I can understand pretty much everything that I want to within the sorts of content that I like to enjoy, at least. Eventually, I started speaking, and I've had lots of conversation classes online where we just chat about basically any subject that comes up. So although most of this has been pretty low effort, I have been consistently doing something every day, which I think really is the key, regardless of what method you use to improve. I could keep doing the same thing, but life is short and it's fun to try new experiences. So I'm going to call the internet's favourite Schweiger, Will Hart, and talk to him about the different approach that he's taken. Let's talk about your process with Anki. Mm-hmm. Would you mind running through what is it you do with Anki to have got to such a good level of Chinese?
I do remember at the beginning of learning Mandarin, as I mentioned earlier, I'm quite a big fan of like kind of sentence patterns. Like I didn't really learn any grammar at all for Mandarin. At least I tried not to, because I didn't find it too helpful. But what I did do was like practice making sentences with sentence patterns, like because there's loads of that. There is in Spanish as well. There's in most languages. There's like these really common, and I'm trying to do similar things for Spanish actually. There are really common like sentence patterns that exist in the language. But and once I was sure, I was pretty confident on this that I wasn't going to like make any major mistakes with it. I'd kind of put it. I'd just have a really simple flashcard where it would just be sentence pattern on the front and then nothing on the back, and I'll just try and make sentences with it. But again, that would be something I'd do very rarely, and I'd kind of use that with caution unless you're pretty confident you're not, because you don't want to be reinforcing loads of mistakes with that kind of practice.
What does that look like in reality? Like if you just did a sentence in English, for example, what sorts of things would you be swapping out?
What sorts of things would I be swapping out? I've never thought about it in English. It's going to be quite hard to do. So let's say we took the sentence, what sorts of things are you going to be swapping out? Like I'd swap it like, what kind of things are you going to be swapping out? Are we going to be swapping anything out? Why are we swapping this out? Can you tell me why we're going to be swapping this out? Like a mistake that I find people making that like kind of contact me about stuff like this is they try and add sentences where like then there's loads of new things in there. If there's more than one new thing in there, like in terms of a grammar structure or in terms of like a new word or something, it's too hard for you, and there's no point like adding that into Anki, because you should like a flashcard is to try and train yourself to recall one thing. If you're trying to retrain yourself to recall 5 things at once, you're going to find it very, very hard and demotivating. I think that's the first. And then the second is obviously like, I still want to make it quite clear, like don't just do Anki and nothing else. Like, because I don't think you'll enjoy it too much. And and it's probably, like as I said, it's much more important to get enough input and to practice output and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Oh, actually, one thing, especially because you're doing Spanish now.
Yeah.
Well, you're doing Spanish as well now. Are you using any English on your cars, or is it still 100% in the language?
So this is the thing. This is the thing I've been doing a bit differently for Spanish, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. I kind of had like an entire English sentence on the front and an entire Spanish sentence on the back to try and see how that worked, and I've been finding it pretty useful. I was worried that if I did that, I'd start speaking Spanish and think in English, but I've actually found once I had collected like a few thousand of these sentences with all the chunks in and stuff, when I do speak Spanish, I haven't really had that problem, but it's too early to say.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. That sounds like it's that's really going to help you. So we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
See, I need to download Anki.
So for the next 30 days, I'll try using sentence flashcards and speak to myself, trying to make new sentences from the information on each card. I like this idea as trying to form new sentences will hopefully start to connect more of the language that I have in my head. So I'm creating some of these sentences in two ways. One is using ChatGPT to create sentences from words that have come up in lessons that I want to remember, and the other is using sentences which I've come up with a tutor to talk about topics that interest me. This is just to get started so I actually have some cards to review in the morning.
So this is day number 3. I'm going to be doing my Anki flashcards right now. Sorry about the beat up old headphones. I've got a cup of tea. I'm making myself nice and comfy. Got some nice tunes on, but I don't want to get hit with a copyright strike from YouTube. So just in case, I've got my my headphones on here. Tengo mi licenciatura. Claro. Tengo mi licencia de conducir. Licencia de matar. Cada vez se cae internet. Cada vez se cae internet. Todas las cosas están hechas en línea. Ahora todo es por internet. The phrases that I've got in here at the minute are all kind of random. I just, I can't remember why in whatever conversation some of these phrases got chucked into the chat in a Skype lesson, or some of them, they might just be random words, and I've asked ChatGPT to create a short sentence for me to chuck in these cards. Some of them, and this is the thing, I need to maybe tweak them a little bit so that they're actually a bit more useful. And they're also quite short. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So anyway, it's under review. So it's the same day, I've just had a haircut, so apologies for the break in continuity. Decidí de hablar un poco en español solo para mostrar dónde estoy, porque como un experimento, que no es un experimento de verdad, pero por este pequeño experiencia, podemos decir, creo que es importante mostrar dónde estoy para ver qué va a pasar con mi español en este mes. Tengo mucho interés en probar diferentes cosas ahora, porque como un creador del contenido es importante de crear cosas como un buffet para vosotros, para probar diferentes cosas que quieres hacer. No estoy diciendo que hay solo una manera de aprender un idioma, pero mi español hasta ahora es desde un montón de input, y claro que sí, puedes adquirir un idioma estudiando, sin estrés, sin flashcards, sin lo que sea. Claro que sí, pero no sé, quiero probar diferentes cosas porque lo que estoy diciendo funciona, pero también por los cuñados en los comentarios, mi español no es perfecto, obviamente lo es bien claro, pero sí, no es tan mal. Creo que estoy conversacional en el idioma. Puedo hablar con gente, mi pronunciación no es tan mal, que es un obstáculo dentro conversaciones. Y claro, también cuando estoy hablando con gente puedo entender 100%, o al menos casi 100%. A veces hay algunas palabras o no sé, algunas frases que es que nuevo para mí, pero más o menos puedo entender casi cualquier cosa. Pues vamos a ver qué va a pasar en este mes, y sí, quizá mi español va a mejorar un poco o un montón, no sé, y sí, tengo mucho interés en lo que va a pasar. So what's the point of doing all this if I like what I've been doing? Well, there are a couple of things, I guess. One is that I like the idea of adding some active recall into what I'm doing. I often find I want to say a word and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but when my tutor suggests it, I instantly understand it. It's a different process to produce a word as opposed to when you're just recognizing it. On top of that, I also want to do this with sentences. So let me explain. Let's say you read something in the language you're learning. You can make sense of the words on the page and follow with what you're reading, but there's a good chance you might not notice if some of those words were in the wrong order. By having to remember them first and then check against a flashcard, I'm intrigued to see if that helps me be more accurate when I'm speaking.
Language update. I was so busy working yesterday that I didn't get around to doing my flashcards, and I feel like a naughty boy who hasn't done his homework. I clearly need to work on building this habit, and it's interesting. I'm still reading, like I've mentioned in a video recently. Wake up and I can read for half an hour before I actually get out of bed. This is when my dog wakes me up super early. I'm not sitting around all day reading, but I'm not going to just start bashing out some flashcards because I want to be speaking. I want to actually try and do this properly. But it does mean that I've gone, I'll do the flashcards in a minute, and then I start working, and then I realise it gets really late and it's time to go to bed, and I haven't done my flashcards. So I say that it's happened. It's just only 2 days have I missed it when I've been really busy. So anyway, like a naughty boy, I'm going to be doing my flashcards now. I'm catching up on my homework, but it does mean I've got loads more reviews to do, which sucks. And also I feel like because I want to get through the reviews, I'm just getting through the flashcards instead of doing it in the spirit of what I want to be trying to do, which is swapping out words and trying things like that.
Habrá gente que lo diga como muletilla, pero no es común. Es algo a lo que él está acostumbrado. Eso es lo que he estado haciendo.
So, side note here, this obviously isn't very scientific. I'm a sample size of 1, and I, the subject, am reflecting on my own experiences. That obviously isn't ideal. But still, I don't think it then makes sense to say that all individual experiences are completely invalid. Anyway, I just wanted to recognise that fact. So, what's the point of flashcards? Let me take you back to 19th century Germany. Hermann Ebbinghaus did some research on memory using himself as a test subject. Through his experiments, he found that after initially remembering something, we start to forget it quite rapidly. However, if you're exposed to that information again, you're more likely to remember it for longer. So for us, that could be seeing a word in the context of a video we've watched, maybe even a conversation. As time goes on, the gaps between those reminders can get shorter until eventually the information is stored in our long-term memory. Ebbinghaus's work has since been backed by modern neuroscience research. So flashcards use a spaced repetition system to try and give you that information at the exact moment that you're most likely to forget it. So because of this, there isn't much point in doing flashcards if you're not going to do them every day. Otherwise, the number of cards that you've got to review starts to rack up every day. But not only that, you are more likely to have forgotten the things that you're supposed to be reviewing. So, a few things. Firstly, if I don't get the reviews done in the first half of the day, my capacity to get the cards right drops, and it is a real slog to get through them. I want to be actively trying to focus on engaging with every card and then trying to make a new sentence or variation, but if it gets late, I just want to smash through the cards so I can get to bed, which basically misses the whole point of doing this. Also, I noticed sentences that I saw in the context of conversations with my tutor are much easier to recall rather than ones that I've created with ChatGPT, where I had to use it to make, say, like a random sentence for a word that I wanted to remember. Though I have made a bit of an error. Some of the sentences that I've put on there are just too long. By the time I check if I'm right, I might be broadly there, but I don't have enough working memory to recall if I got some elements of it 100% right. So I'm gonna split up the sentences from some of the cards. If you think of it this way, I can then say more variations of the sentences out loud, which was kind of the whole point of the exercise. I don't want to be just regurgitating long sentences in conversation. Instead, I want to be trying to activate a lot of my passive vocabulary to try to form these new sentences. So hopefully I'll be able to stick with this until the end of the month then and have not completely wasted my time.
Surprise, surprise. I've had another busy day and I've left my flashcards really late. It's nearly 9:30 in the evening and I still need to just smash through my flashcards. I've had one of those days where I just have to crack on with loads of work, and sometimes if I've been driving places, I've been listening to stuff, had a podcast on whilst I was doing the washing up, so I've still been getting plenty of input, but the flashcards, I'm still trying to find a way to get that into my daily habits. But more and more it's a thing that I know I have to do. I haven't missed any other days, and today I'm back adding more flashcards after a couple of days of just trying to keep my head above water. So I'm trying to keep slow and steady and build up how accustomed I am to doing this habit, so that rather than going full throttle and burning out and actually stopping doing the whole thing, I'd much rather get used to it and then build up my capacity to adding flashcards. We'll see how it goes. I'm optimistic. I'm getting more used to it, so we'll see how the second half of this challenge goes.
So there's something that I found interesting already as a result of this. In Spanish, there are two forms of to be, ser and estar. Without going into it too much, if I'm getting input by listening, reading, or watching stuff, it makes no odds which one it is. Therefore, until you've built a solid form of the language in your head, if a speaker were to get it wrong, you might not notice, as you can still follow along with the meaning of the content. Whereas when I have to produce the language and remember it accurately, it's much clearer whether or not I've got it right, as I can obviously see the answer on the back of the flashcard. Though I will say that people can still understand you if you're not 100% correct grammatically all of the time. Let's be honest, you're not a native speaker of your target language, so don't sweat the small stuff. Despite making some errors in my Spanish, I can still have conversations and be understood. Something that I've also tried with a few words that for whatever reason just didn't stick is the old mnemonics. Now, people often use them when they're memorizing characters in Chinese, but I hadn't tried it with Spanish. So for whatever reason, I just couldn't remember the word hipotecas, which means mortgages, whenever I saw it on a flashcard. Now, it sounds weird to verbalize it as it's just an image that I had in my head, but I thought of a hippo wearing some sort of Aztec headdress inside a building. Hipotecas. Weird as it sounded, I never had a problem with remembering the flashcard again. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do it for every word because that would be overkill, but it is a technique that you can use if you need it, and it does work. So I've had to pause new cards for a couple of days. I was doing 10 new sentences a day, some of which were quite long. If they were just new words rather than full sentences, it probably wouldn't be so bad, but I don't have hours to spend on this every day, and I suspect you don't either. I want to give my brain some time to try and catch up with these reviews as they're really starting to rack up. I'm also trying to be honest about my mistakes, as it sort of misses the point if I say, oh, that's good enough, if I was close but not quite there. This way, hopefully I can then stay consistent and build this habit.
So it is actually fairly early, and I'm going to do my flashcards first of all today. I've noticed that when I do them first thing, I've got so much more energy, so my responses are better. I've got more patience rather than just smashing through the flashcards. If I leave it till late at night, what I find is I just want to get through them, get it over and done with. I don't know, it feels a little bit more creative. I feel like I've got a little bit more mental capacity to start playing with the sentences I see and trying to make some new ones, which is partly the whole point of this whole thing. I'm staying consistent, and that's actually kind of more enjoyable. I've got my little cup of tea, so I'm going to just smash through some flashcards this morning before I get on with my day. So, it has been 30 days. How have I found the experience, and more importantly, will I keep going? And there is one massive problem which I have, but I'll get to that in a minute. So it's been surprising. It's been a different pace, and I've definitely made some mistakes along the way. The biggest one was having sentence flashcards that were basically too long. I tried to change this by cutting some of the sentences in half and reducing the number of new cards each day, but I don't think I quite got it right. If I were a regular user of flashcards, might not have been too bad, but just starting out with trying to create a new habit, I think I made the whole thing a bit too complicated to start off. Rather than having to remember one word at a time, some of the sentences had more than one thing in combination with perhaps some grammar. So doing the challenge has underlined to me that I don't like doing flashcards, but they can work. There were some times when I remembered an entire sentence that was quite long, word for word, and surprised myself. Some of the words I was able to get into conversation when they weren't in my active vocabulary before. So often I didn't feel motivated to start, but once I got going, and more importantly, once I finished, it wasn't too bad, and I felt a sense of accomplishment for the day. Like all of these things, it's about building the habit. The best way to stick to a habit is to start easy and build it up over time. I probably went a bit too hard, which is why it was tricky. So, the massive problem I have with flashcards, which is very difficult to get over. The biggest strength and weakness of flashcards is the spaced repetition system. It's basically in control, so I don't get to decide what to review and when to review it. Whereas if I were to write phrases that I wanted to get into my active vocabulary, into say a notebook, and try and use them in conversation, or try and create sentences with them like I've been doing with this method, I would get to decide which ones I use and when. Now, I totally get that the strength of the spaced repetition system is it's better than you at knowing what you're likely to forget and provide that to you just before you're going to forget it. All of these sentences that you're reviewing or phrases you're reviewing are out of context, and I don't enjoy that, but that's life. What have I learned, and will I keep going? So I like the idea of adding some active recall into my routine. I will still have my main focus of getting a lot of input, not because I have to, but because it's just genuinely enjoyable. There are creators I love and books that I want to read that are all in Spanish, so this is something that I'll be doing for the rest of my life. But I am aware that there are many words that I would like to have to hand more easily, and therefore it makes sense to add an activity, be that flashcards or looking through a notebook, to help with that. So I will delete all of the flashcards that I've made this month. I'll start over with some smaller chunks, which will be easier to get into sentences rather than memorizing and regurgitating a whole sentence in conversation, which feels a bit awkward. I'll see how it goes. It might be that I prefer to work on my active vocabulary in another way, but we will see. For your language learning, you don't have to do everything right now and burn out. See what works for you. If you've got this far, let me know in the comments what your language learning routine is like. I'd love to find out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.